Hello. With Christmas fast approaching, I thought it would be great to look at a lovely mature Pinot Noir, because personally I think Pinot Noir is a really good pairing for a classic turkey Christmas dinner. As a result, I thought I'd look at this wine because it's a wine from a producer acknowledged as one of New Zealand's leading Pinot Noir producers. It's also a nicely mature wine. Now, Escarpment is an estate that was founded in 1999, and it was founded by Larry Mckenna. And Larry is an important character in the development of Martinborough wines and in the development of New Zealand as a producer of Pinot Noirs in general. Larry is sometimes referred to as the Prince of Pinot. But actually, Larry Mckenna grew up in Australia. He came from Adelaide and went to Roseworthy Agricultural College to study to make wine. He graduated there in 1976, and then in 1980 moved to New Zealand, where initially he was working for a company called Delegates. At that stage would have been based in Auckland. 6 years later, in 1986, he joined Martinborough Vineyards as their winemaker. And it was in this role that Larry started to gain acclaim as a producer of Pinot Noirs. In fact, his first vintage, the 1986, is one of the wines that's renowned for having helped Martinborough become recognised as a region for producing Pinot Noirs. And Larry was very much a leader and a pioneer, both for the variety and for the region. During the 1990s, he spent a lot of time working in Burgundy, doing vintages there, working for the likes of Domaine Dujac. And some of the ideas that he brought back with him, such as whole bunch fermentation, are ideas that are now quite widely employed in the region. So I think, as well as actually sort of leading the innovation of winemaking for this region, Larry was also very influential in terms of ensuring that Martinborough actually became recognised as a producer of world-class Pinot Noirs. As I say, in 1999, he founded Escarpment as his own label. And this is based in the Te Mana Valley. And really, he followed the Burgundy example, but very much set about focusing on single vineyard Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays. He also made Pinot Gris and actually a surprisingly good Pinot Blanc. But his aim was always very much to produce wines that showed off the character of the exceptional terroir of the deep alluvial gravels that Martinborough is famous for. Now, Escarpment was actually sold to an Australian producer, Torbreck, back in 2018, but Larry stayed on as CEO for a further few years until 2022, when he officially retired. Although I think his retirement still sees him quite involved in wine growing and in consultancy. For instance, he runs and works in his own Maceration vineyard. Now, Escarpment's home on Te Mana Road has 24 hectares of land. These are terraces of deep alluvial gravels that spread out along the banks of the Hawanga River. I'm not sure exactly how much of those 24 hectares is planted to vines, but the vineyards sit on these deep alluvial gravels. These terraces were laid down over 20,000 years ago by the river and comprise layers of gravel and loams. And this composition gives soils that are low in fertility and are free draining, which obviously are prerequisites for growing healthy, balanced grapevines. Now, Escarpment source fruit from their own vineyards, but also work with growers, and they tend to have long-term relationships with growers, and thus these established relationships tend to be reflected in the high quality of the fruit coming from these growers. Now, Escarpment is located about 3 miles to the east of the village of Martinborough, and there they have the winery, and at this stage I think 2 key vineyards that they own and another that they buy from. I think it's worth mentioning that the name Te Mana actually means special or secret place in the Maori language. Obviously, subsequent to the production of this wine, but Escarpment gained organic certification for their wines in 2019. So in 2016, Escarpment were using 3 principal vineyards, 2 that they owned and 1 other, from which they made 3 single vineyard wines. So these were Kupe, Kiwa and Te Rehwa. Kupe is Escarpment's home block. It's a high-density planted vineyard on these typical deep Martinborough gravel terraces, and it's predominantly planted with a clone of Pinot Noir called the Abel clone, which is New Zealand's special clone of Pinot Noir that, according to legend, was illicitly collected from the vineyards of Domaine Romani Conti in Burgundy. Now, in contrast, the Te Rehwa vineyard was planted by somebody called Jeff Bunny, who evidently in the 1990s sourced as many clones of Pinot Noir as he could and planted them randomly throughout a 1.1 hectare site. I get the impression there's more loam and the topsoil of the vineyard here. Kiwa is the second of these single vineyards that was owned by Escarpment at the time of 2016. Again, an alluvial terrace site. This was planted slightly more methodically with a selection of clones, UC Davis 5, 6, possibly UC Davis 13, and more recently some replanting has gone on with clone 828. Now more recently a fourth vineyard called Pahi has been taken over by Escarpment, and prior to purchasing it they actually started doing the management of this vineyard, but that didn't actually happen until 2017, so fruit from that vineyard seems unlikely to have gone into this wine. So just to explain, this wine, Escarpment's Martinborough Pinot Noir, is described as an assemblage from some of the best Pinot Noir vineyards across the Martinborough region. And they say that approximately 75% of the wine comes from vineyards on Tame Manor Road, although they're not necessarily saying that 75% of it comes from their vineyards on Tame Manor Road. So just to come back to the able clone that I mentioned when I was talking about the Kupe Vineyard, because this is a key component in the blend of this wine. Well, I'm unsure of exactly what proportion of the wine it makes up, as clearly the proportion of each vineyard being used will vary from year to year. And as we know, there's some vagary about the clonal composition of the Rehwa Vineyard anyway. But yes, as well as the able clone, this will contain UC Davis clones 5, 6, 13, and a number of the Dijon clones, as I've already mentioned, some 828 possibly. But the reason why the able clone, or to give its less formal name, the Gumboot clone, is so valued in Martinborough is its ability to restrain its yields and produce intense, full-bodied wines with good colour, structure and excellent tannins. Now, by all accounts, 2016 was a good vintage for Martinborough. It was perfect weather in December of 2015 for flowering, and that managed to ensure an ideal crop, but yet one that didn't actually need thinning. An exceptionally warm and dry summer followed on from that, and that gave all the elements that Escarpment feel are distinctive for their wines. So there was structure, complexity, an attractive velvety smooth texture, and a mixture of rich black, dark red fruit, and also some slightly more lively green elements. The fruit was entirely hand harvested and it was crushed into open fermenters, and the approach here is very low intervention. Fermentation was allowed to start with the indigenous yeasts that had made their way to the winery with the fruit from the vineyards, and the fruit was very gently handled. There was no pumping, just the cap of skins being plunged back down into the fermenting must and wine every 12 hours. And maceration on skins between all the lots lasted for an average of about 15 days. The wine aged for 11 months in French oak barriques, about a quarter of which were new, and the wine was then put into a stainless steel tank to age for a further 9 months before it was bottled, and bottling went on without any fining or filtration. So let's have a look at the wine and see what we think, shall we? The wine has a fairly vibrant ruby red colour. It's of a medium intensity. While there's quite a darkness to the colour, it's not particularly deep. I can see through it very readily, and yet at the same time the colour isn't particularly yellowing or oranging to the rim. It is lighter at the rim, but it doesn't seem to be showing any signs of tiring. So giving it a nice big swirl here, and again I've got this in a large Pinot glass to help release the aromas. Let's see what we make of those, shall we? That's a rich, complex and enticing perfume. There really are some quite high-toned notes of perhaps strawberry, raspberry, cranberry, probably more raspberry actually, more that sort of spicy richness. There are developed notes. There are hints of forest floor, dried leaves, moving on to sort of slight notes of truffle. I wouldn't necessarily say mushroom notes, but maybe sort of heading towards that sort of quite sort of umami sort of style. And then there is this really rich, enticing fruit sitting in the middle of the aromas, which has a richness of sort of black cherry, almost heading towards a prune sort of note. And yet there is still a liveliness of sort of bright red cherry there as well. On the top of the aroma, there are some delicate spice notes. I'm wondering if it's sort of bergamot or something like that. There's plenty going on what's a very complex nose. It's driven by powerful ripe fruit, but behind that is a really high-toned, elegant complexity. So let's have a taste. The palate is obviously dry, quite structured. The tones are smooth, grainy, and initially quite cedary. Then you start to get a sort of a rich mocha note coming in and a chocolatey texture across the bottom there. Now the alcohol on this particular wine is listed on the label as being 14%, and it is giving a breadth and a richness across the back palate there, where those bright notes of juicy black cherry head more towards sort of notes of black plum and perhaps prune. There's spicy notes on the finish where the acidity is quite balanced. There's enough freshness to give some lovely definition, some structured black fruit, which is almost becoming licoricey towards the back palate. There are savoury notes, but they're being matched by the richness of the black fruit that's there. The combination of the acidity and the fine tannins are giving a mouth-watering sensation on the finish. And actually, I'm relatively surprised. The back label suggests this is a wine that can age in your cellar for 10 years or so. Some of the critics' reviews I saw instead suggested that this was a wine that would drink out to about 2030. And I think I agree with the critics more on this, because this wine still seems to have a tightness, a tension and a structure. I think there's the potential for more tertiary development to come here, more of the truffle notes and the forest floor that I saw on the aromas coming through more readily on the back palate. I'm now starting to see the beginnings of some of those developed notes as the wine's been sitting on my tongue for a while, but it's not opening quite as readily as I'd expected. The wine is lovely and I'm enjoying it. I looked at the Wine Sector aggregated critics score. That's 91 out of 100. And I did wonder when I first saw that whether that was being a little unfair to the wine. I have to say, at the moment, I think that's about right. However, I do think there's a concentration and a structure which suggests that this wine has the ability to open further and show its tertiary complexity more obviously than it's doing at the moment. So I think the wine seems to show a potential to exceed the score that it's been given. Currently, I think it's showing very nicely, but I do think given 3 or 4 years longer in the cellar, this is a wine that has the potential to exceed that rating. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of these tastings, or you've been watching several of my tastings and you haven't yet subscribed, it would be great if you consider doing that. That way you can also set yourself an alert and be notified every time I publish a new taste, and then you won't miss them. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave those in the comments box below. And if you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, it would be great if you'd consider forwarding it to them. I'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. I will of course leave a link to the Wine Searcher website for this vintage of this wine, so you can see if it's available near you and at what price. And therefore it just remains for me to say thank you so much again for watching, and I do hope that maybe you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another video tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.